Hello and welcome to the Sky Blue Times YouTube channel. Today I wanted to go through some of the stats I pulled out and put together on tables on the X account from the Club World Cup for Manchester City players, whether it is the physical data, the minutes, pressing data, line breaking passes. There's so many different things that I was managed to pull. There's a lot of other stuff I've got ideas to eventually do more of, but on this video I wanted to go through all of those tables, point out what some of these metrics mean, and then what we can see from some of the players that have performed very well in these and the players that haven't performed as well in these metrics. So there's no place better to start than to go over to the minutes, and as you can see from here, these are the minutes for the players at the Club World Cup, players that played the most minutes, made the most starts, most full 90s, that appeared off the bench the most times, and the players that were unused subs. The players that are highlighted in red are ones that I think the future is somewhat up in the air of them being here next season, and then the players in the blue are the ones that have been brought in either in the summer or in a January transfer window. And as we can see for the new signings, the likes of Aït-Nouri and Tijani Reinders are virtually straight into the starting 11 and playing a lot of minutes. Omar Marmoush also a backup role to Erling Haaland, sharing minutes with him, and you saw him pick up his minutes playing in place of Haaland rather than playing out wide, which might be a nod to where they see him use more over the course of next season, depending on performances of our other attacking players. You then got Cherki that's moving his way into the team and got one start and always came off the bench. But yeah, to be really expected when you're looking at some of the attacking players that we do have, that they're not going to be rushed immediately into playing every single game week in, week out. And then you look further down, you've got Vitor Hayes, you've got Nico Gonzalez, Kusanov, Claudio Echeverri, all players that played less minutes, but then all players that are much more the kind of like long-term replacements for different positions. So I think on one hand, they weren't going to play all of the minutes, and then on the other hand, you would have liked to have seen all of them play a little bit more minutes, particularly Nico Gonzalez and the central defenders. Obviously, Echeverri with that injury then ruled him out from playing any more minutes, but was very promising in what he did play. And then yeah, if we go through all the names I've listed here, the likes of Edison and Ortega, I think there's reports with Edison with going to Galatasaray. There's the comments of Ortega after the Club World Cup, well, during the Club World Cup actually. His future wasn't really cemented, and he will talk about it after the tournament. You then got all the central defenders like John Stones, Nathan Ake, Manuel Akanji. You'd think we're going to have to move one of them on, just given the number of spots available for players and the number of central defenders that we do have. If not two of them will be moving on. Ilkay Gundogan, a lot of reports moving him about him making a move away. You then got Mateus Nunes, that is not necessarily the starting right back. So then if we were to buy a starting right back, where does that leave his future? Where does he see himself? Does he see himself playing as a right back, or does he want to play more full-time elsewhere? Is he happy here? So all of these things are kind of up in the air, and as we go through the summer, a lot can change. But as we'll go on to later on in the video with all these different stats, it's important to remember just how little minutes some players have played. So when we're looking at some of these metrics, you have to bear that in mind. The minutes that they played, you have to bear in mind the conditions that they were there. So, for example, the first game, the conditions there, not exactly well suited for a team that was going to be aggressive and pressing high out of the gate. And then you look at the stage of the season, you've got players coming into this that are fresh off playing little minutes in the last few months. You've got players that have been run into the ground. You think Bernardo Silva, Ruben Diaz having to play their national team games after they finish the season. So all of these things kind of factor in to what we may be looking at on all of these metrics for when we get into the middle of the season, when we're talking about City trying to be in their best version in the Champions League, in the knockout stages of that competition, the title running of the Premier League. That's a very different version of Manchester City to the one we would be seeing in this Club World Cup, at least from all the conditions that you would see from there. And then if we move over to this one here, this is just goals scored per minutes from the Club World Cup. And Chelsea, who end up winning the competition, Paris Saint-Germain as well in the final, ranked very highly. A lot of European teams that are scoring lots and lots of goals here. Interesting that Manchester City finished the tournament scoring 16 goals, alongside Bayern Munich, the second joint most. And then obviously Chelsea scored the most goals in the competition. But if we're doing just by goals scored per 90 minutes, then Manchester City with 3.81 is right up there. You see with Juventus being there as well, probably speaks a little bit to the group that both of these teams were in. But if we're looking at the top end of teams scoring a lot of goals, it's good to see City at least within this group when we come from a season where one of those issues that we faced was just struggling to score goals, to put the ball in the back of the net. And when you look at all the attacking players that we do have now, I don't think scoring goals is an issue. It really does turn to the players that are playing, having the right personnel, and what we're able to do defensively out of possession. That's going to make a big difference to how the team performs over the course of next season. This is just a comparison of City in different phases and a few different other things over the 4 games that they played in the Club World Cup. So as you can see here with this first one, in possession phase, build up unopposed, build up opposed, progression, final third, attack and transition, another. There's a bulk of City time is played in the final third. That only increases as we get to the Al Hilal match compared to some of the earlier ones, so a little bit less time settled in possession when you're looking at them. A decent chunk of attacking transition, more so in the first game compared to the other ones. And you just saw City settle down a bit more as they went across the match. As we see the out of possession phase, as was really quite evident from when you were watching the match against Juventus, they played a lot of that match pressing Juventus, and that shows up in this metric. And then you look at the amount of time they spent in transition, the amount of time they spent in counter press, all kind of lines up with everything that you did see in the matches when you were watching. Obviously, very few parts of the match were spent in a low block. So you think about that opening game, City weren't as aggressive. I mentioned the conditions at the start. It's not really a surprise to see that they gave up a little bit more possession in that and spent a bit more time in a low block compared to all the other matches afterwards. You then look at movement type, a lot more runs in behind when it comes to the match against Al Hilal versus against Juventus with the movements in front. And then much more movement in between when we're talking about Al Ain. That makes sense when you were looking at Bernardo Silva, Gundogan, Echeverri and other players, Foden when he come on for the second half, all trying to move in between the lines against them in that match. You then move to this one, possession regained in the opposition half. So there's a lot more regains against Al Hilal. Bear in mind that could go to extra time, but it's still encouraging to see the numbers that they are putting up there, particularly with the regains in the opposition half. And it's interesting just to see these numbers in comparison to the Juventus game, where at least from when you were watching that match, it felt like City were doing quite well out of possession and recovering the ball, but particularly in all of these other games they did regain the ball a lot more, which we'll get onto a bit more later on with the players in more detail. And then if you move to this one, again, more metrics that we're comparing to. So City obviously spend a lot of their time in possession, a bit more out of possession, as I mentioned, with the opening game. And then as we saw against Al Hilal more in the second half, it's not really a surprise that there was more of a City spending time out of possession in those matches. In those 2 matches, you look at attempts on goal, only increased across the 3 group games, encouraging to see. You then move to line breaks, completely line breaks over here, and then defensive line breaks. So it is good to see these kind of numbers against Al Hilal. It's not really surprised at Al Ain that you would see that. They were a team that was sat quite deep in their block, and it was on City to break them. So that's why, as I mentioned earlier, you see the movement in between, and then obviously more defensive line breaks in that one. Attempts faced, and goals conceded. Obviously, in the Al Hilal match, they gave up a lot more attempts on goal, and that will be the big area they'll want to improve when it comes to next season. As I mentioned, it's about out of possession work, it's about the defensive shape and the defensive work, the counter press, so on and so forth. As I've covered in previous videos, this will be the kind of defining factor of how successful City are into next season, because they've added so much quality in the attacking areas. No doubt with the movement and the finishing quality of the players that they do have, they will score goals. But if you're not able to deal with the defensive aspect, to be better out of possession, to deal with the counter-attacks that we faced so many times last season, then it doesn't really matter how many goals you've scored. You're always going to get caught out if you're going to concede a couple goals every single game. It's going to be very hard to win football matches. Then move to this one. So this is line breaks, line breaking passes, so attempts, completion rate, and then the type of them. So there's breaking the opposition line by going around the opposition block, there's going over, and then there's going through on the ground. So they're like three main types that I've included here for the players. And then obviously you've got all the breaks and attempts and completion rates. And I've gone through and I've highlighted in green the top three for each metric. So it's not really a surprise for me to see Gvardiol, Rodri and Nico Gonzalez be the top three for line breaking passes. And then obviously you've got Matheus Nunes on there being a fullback. You've obviously got the other central defenders in Akanji and Diaz ranked quite highly. Kusanov ranks fairly highly as well. Shirky as well progresses the ball a hell of a lot with his passing ability. So all the usual suspects, but encouraging to see that your main number 6, your backup number 6, and what's going to be your starting left centre back are all ranking highly in this metric. That's what you need to see. You go around to then the type, and then you see Fosco Vardiol a lot more around. So that makes sense when you're talking about a central defender being deep with a block in front of them, compared to somebody like Rodri, who is going to rank highly in other metrics. And then you've also got Vitor Hayes, and then you've got Kusanov that also rank highly in line breaker passes around. Matheus Nunes with 15 as well per 90. Not really a surprise to see that. These are the guys that will be in the back line with the opposition block in front of them. You then look at line breaking passes over the top, and then you've got Josko Vardiol, you've got Rodri, you've got Phil Foden, Cherki, and then the two down the bottom, Gonzalez and Kusanov as well. So encouraging stuff to see that the names that are popping up are the players that we do want to see week in, week out play for this team, at least play more regularly in the likes of Kusanov. Players like Nico Gonzalez that would be in place of Rodri as well. So encouraging to see those kind of numbers when it comes to playing over the top. And they're all players that you think. So if Vardiol's playing left back, you're going to get less of him playing over the top compared to what he could do if he was playing as a central defender, as he did in this tournament. You then look at Rodri being out last season, being injured. You look at Cherki that's come in as a new player, and then you look at Nico Gonzalez that didn't join until January. Then you look at Kusanov, new sign until January, that's yet to be properly kind of integrated into the team. These are all players that they didn't start the season with. So when you're looking at the kind of aspect of line breaking passes, you're missing a good tool there when it comes to progressing through the opposition block. So to add those players in for the start of next season will be much better for the team. You then look at line breaking passes through the opposition block. Dejani Reinders stands out. It's not really surprised that he's high in this metric, that Manchester City did buy him, and we saw from all the games he did play that this guy's going to come in and immediately fire the ball into the players in front of him. So yeah, not surprised to see him. Rodri obviously, and then Nico Gonzalez, exactly what you want to see for the two guys that are going to be playing majority of the minutes as a number 6 next season. So yeah, just on that one alone, like encouraging signs for the players that do appear, both in the types that we would see, and then obviously the volume of passes. We move on to this one, which is offers to receive. So we're talking about a situation where a player has the ball, City are in possession, and then what is the movement that the players around are making to then receive the ball. So you see here total offers to receive, and then total offers received, and then the percentage that they are received. So as you can see from somebody like Rodri, he's always making himself available to receive the ball. You compare that 80 to Nico Gonzalez with 52. He still ranks highly, but he could obviously make himself much more available to receive the ball, and that will be one angle of why he needs to make improvements when he is playing as the number 6 to constantly move himself into space to receive it, compared to Reinders, who's come in immediately and 77.3 already ranks quite highly. Phil Foden, Echeverri, two players that, at least with Echeverri, I think it's quite obvious how similar he is to Phil in this aspect, that they are both players that will always be moving to get onto the ball, always demanding. Maybe not so last season with Foden, and that speaks to some of the issues that he did have. Was you were watching him be on the pitch and kind of going through the motion, but you weren't seeing the Phil Foden you're used to, that would always be demanding the ball, always finding himself pockets of space, whether it is pulling out wide, finding space between the lines, etc. In this tournament, we saw that Phil Foden and then Echeverri in his small cameo in the first half against Al Ain. These are players that were always on the move, looking to find space, and then because they're always on the move, they're always offering. That's why they then rank highly with the amount of the times they receive the ball. Echeverri didn't receive it as much as you'd expect, but obviously with Foden trusted to receive the ball in these different positions that Echeverri just hasn't earned yet as he's working his way into the team and built that trust. And that's why, because Phil Foden's so active in offering to receive the ball, he gets it so many times compared to some other players. So you think with Echeverri, 138 per 90 offers to receive, only receives 20, that's 14.5%. You compare that to Phil Foden up here with 35.4%. So yeah, you can see the difference in a player that is more trusted. But then if we go to somebody like, let's go through down here. We go to somebody like Savinho, 29.1. He's only making 20 offers to receive, and then he's only receiving 6 of those. So you need to up that volume if you're going to do it, even if you are a player that's playing in a forward line as a winger. You look at Jeremy Doku by comparison, 41.9 offers to receive per 90, and then he's getting it 15.6 times per 90. So just by the number of times that you're making that movement, you'll expect to see the ball more. If you're making a small amount, then you can't really complain that you're seeing the ball enough. You just have to add the volume, even if the quality of the run is really good. City definitely now have, for next season, the players to be able to spot those to play those passes and spot those runs, and then from that, it's now on the players to be able to make the volume of the runs and increase them. So when you're talking about somebody like Erling Haaland last season versus this season, we now have the players that will pick out his runs. Now it's on him to increase the number of runs again. And what you saw over the course of last season was those runs drop off. You saw Marmoush arrive and immediately add way more movement ahead of the ball. Erling Haaland needs to increase those volume of runs, I would say, and trust that the team now has the quality of players to be able to pick them out much more consistently. We then look at if you go across with the movement type, so in front just means in front of the ball carrier, in between means between the lines. When we're talking about the opposition block, the types are always in relation to that. So you're in front of the opposition block, offering to receive the ball. If you're moving out to in, then you're moving from the outside of the opposition block. So you think about Jeremy Doku being out wide, but then he moves inside past the fullback to be between the lines. So he's moving out to in. That would be that one there. You think in to out is then if the player was on the inside, then moves back outside of the opposition block. That would be that one. In behind, obviously in behind the opposition defensive line. And then no movement means that the player's not made any movement at all to be able to receive the ball, but they are still offering to receive it. So you think about Nathan Ake and Vitor Hayes being together as a centre-back partnership. There's times where Vitor Hayes doesn't need to make a move to be able to offer to receive the ball. He's just asking for it. So that would be what you would class for that with no movement. And then when we go through, so as I mentioned, it's good to see that the players that are receiving the ball a lot and are making a lot of the movements, as I mentioned earlier. And then when we move to the type of runs, it's not really a surprise that Rodri would rank really highly with in front, as well as Nico Gonzalez. It's just going to be a lot of the positions that they find themselves in, playing as that number 6. And then obviously Phil Foden, Cherki rank really highly for movements to receive between the lines. Claudio Echeverri as well ranks really highly for this. Whereas somebody like Jeremy Doku, we saw in the game against Juventus him do a bit more of that, but he's not really a player known for offering to proceed between the lines compared to somebody like, you look at Dejani Reinders. And then when we go to some of the other wingers, Bob 4.3, Savinho 2.4, these are players that are not frequently moving between the lines to receive the ball, compared to somebody like Omar Marmoush, 16.3 per 90. So not only is he offering his runs in behind, but he's also dropping and finding space between the lines and then asking for the ball. You then look at out to in. Savinho makes a lot of these runs, so you think about when he is holding the width and then he runs inside of the fullback and then looks to receive it before he then goes between the fullback and the central defender, or he looks to link up with another player. It's something we see from him quite frequently, so it's not really a surprise to see him ranked so highly. Phil Foden, 5.9, another one ranks highly, pull out wide, then move inside. Oscar Bob as well, makes a lot of sense. We then move to into out. Players that are pulling out wide. That's why you think of players like Foden again will rank highly. Echeverri ranks highly. Oscar Bob as well. Those kind of short bursts of pace, short little movements that they would make, we associate with these players. Shirky as well, 2.9. Makes sense. Omar Mamouche again makes sense. Moves between the lines, and then when he's inside that block, pulling out wide. So these are all players that we'd expect to rank highly in this. And then when we're looking back at last season, and you're thinking about all of these type of movements that we're just going through with this table. Bob's been injured. Shirky's just come in. Echeverri's just come in. Foden has not been near what he used to be with all this movement, so you don't have him there. And you remove all of these players, Marmouche coming in January, you're moving a hell of a lot of movement from the team, from what it used to be at. So it's not really a surprise to look back at last season and see how stale it was at times when City were trying to attack, because the movement from all the players across the pitch was so poor. You look at him behind, Marmouche ranks very highly for this one. Player coming January, desperately needed it. That helps a hell of a lot. It's not something you're going to see highlighted on the pundit panels. It's not something you're going to see come in on the kind of stats you see on SofaScore and all those kind of apps. But that is crucial for the team that he came in and offered more of that movement. So yeah, they desperately need that. It's no surprises again to see the likes of Echeverri, Oscar Bob as well, when you're talking about being in a more settled possession for Manchester City against an opposition team and then making that short burst behind the opposition lines. That's what Echeverri and Bob would do. And then, as I mentioned, Foden, Shirky, players that you didn't have last season that rank highly for this as well. And then when we move to somebody like Jeremy Doku, he's increased this in the tournament, so he's on 15.9, runs in behind compared to what he used to be. Savinho 12.4. So when it comes to the wingers, you want to see those numbers go up if they can do. But if those are the guys that are playing a lot of your minutes, if you think about the likes of Jack Grealish as well, a player that's not really going to be known for making lots of runs in behind as well when he was playing, both last season, the season before. As I keep saying through this video, it's not a surprise when you look at last season to see the way Manchester City attacked because of the players that you had and the runs that they would make. And obviously in the case of Savinho and Doku, we will see improvements. In the case of Oscar Bob, when he's fit, we will see improvements. When Phil Foden's back to his usual self, we will see improvements. But when we were at that point last season and we had loads of issues going around the team, one of those was not having that movement off the ball from your attacking players. And now City will have that next season. And it will be very interesting to see how Guardiola mixes that all together. And then last of all here, just no movement. As you can see, trying to see there, 15.4. So Akanji, you look at Ryan Shirky ranking quite highly as well. And then Oscar Bob that rank highly in that one. We just move over to the next one here. This is looking at pressing. So you've got pressing direct at the ball carrier, pressing indirect, so a player that is not in possession of the ball but you're applying pressure to them. You've got pushing on, which is essentially you've got a player that will close down the space between them and an opposition player who is not on the ball but they're not actively pressing that player, and then pushing on to press is combining that with them pressing on that. And then obviously you've got possession regains, apologies for that one, possession regains, and then you've got loose ball reception. So you think about the opposition playing the ball over the top but then a player doesn't make the run and one of our centre backs is able to pick it up, that will be a loose ball reception. So yeah, as we go through this table, I've got the top three highlighted in green. You look at pressing directly, Matheus Nunes ranks very highly, not really a surprise. A player that is going to be playing at the fullback and with the pressing that we would do, would rank highly in that with the pressing scheme that we do have. Phil Foden, not really a surprise. Rodri, not a surprise again for these players to be in that top 3. Nico O'Reilly, 7.5, again playing left back. Not surprising for him to rank highly in that. You look at Ryan Aït-Nouri, that's something you obviously want to improve when it comes to next season when they get him back. We saw in the Al Hilal match that when you are pressing direct as a fullback, it's very important for Manchester City to get that right. So yeah, been just see how he gets on. And then when we're looking at pressing indirect, I think this is quite telling. This is something that, as I mentioned earlier, with the line breaker passes and some of the other stuff, a lot of this data is not going to be the stuff you see on your sofa scores and your FOT mobs, and it's not going to be the stuff that you see regularly online. But this stuff does happen. This is important to the game, and always applying pressure is something that City struggled with last season. You think about the blame that the back line gets for the balls going over the top and not having the pace, but then when you're looking at the players in front of you that are stationary, they're not applying pressure, whether it is directly on the ball carrier or it is indirectly on another player that is without possession of the ball. It's very hard to be able to do that as a defender, deal with those situations all game long without having your teammates up front apply good pressure. So when it comes to pressing indirectly, to me it's not a surprise, but the way he's spoken about online, it would be a surprise to people that Erling Haaland ranks quite highly on this, but he does a lot of work pressing. He can do better when it comes to the direct pressing, when it comes to leading that press at the front, directing it. He can definitely do better on that aspect, but when it comes to applying indirect pressure, he is a guy always looking to be able to do that and is always on the move. And then when you look at your other ones, Cherki ranks highly. We saw this in the matches. I think it was a kind of standout across a couple of matches, just how hard he was running compared to what we've been kind of seen talked about online, the way it's been reported, the way he works out of possession. But when we were watching the matches, I so definitely did think, okay, that's all nonsense, really. You can see this guy's come in, wants to work very hard, wants to fit in and do the work out of possession, and the numbers all back it up, as we'll get onto later on with the physical data as well. On top of that, Oscar Bob, indirect pressing, not a surprise. This is a player Guardiola has lauded across last season for being the best in the team out of possession with his pressing, being able to apply pressure to 2-3 different players and manage that distance and be so quick across the ground. So of course Bob's going to rank highly in this one. Bernardo Silva, I think it's worth mentioning, as we'll see with the next couple metrics. There's a reason why he was getting into the midfield compared to some of the other players like Gundogan, like Kovacic. And part of it is because he's a player that is always looking to apply pressure and close distance between him and the opposition player, even if he's not the most decisive ball winner and always recovering the ball. He is somebody that will always close the distance and apply pressure and run the ground and cover the ground, and that's something that Gundogan just can't match, as you can see in some of these metrics. You think so, pressing indirectly 26.7 for Bernardo Silva, Gundogan 14.3. And then when you're looking at pushing on, so moving up to then close that distance between, Bernardo Silva is on 25, and then when you're looking at Gundogan, he's on 6.2 per 90. And then when we're moving on to pushing on and then into a press, so close that distance, then you press the player, Bernardo Silva 15.3, and then when you look at Gundogan, it's 3.3. So when you're looking at those two differences between the players, it should not be a surprise why Bernardo Silva was getting those minutes in midfield. It's because he was bringing that energy, bringing those legs in midfield, rather than being the player that's explosive in the sprint or decisive winning back the ball, but he can apply pressure in the midfield. And that was part of the reason he would have been getting selected quite a few times. And then if we look at some of the other players that rank quite highly on pushing on, other than Bernardo Silva, it is Oscar Bob, it is Echeverry, to be expected, Phil Foden, Cherki ranks highly there. You've got Erling Haaland as well. These are all good things to see from new players coming into the team, players you expect to get more minutes next season, that they are performing well in these metrics. Especially Bernardo Silva, if he's staying to then still be doing this kind of work out of possession. And then pushing on into a press, you've also got Phil Foden there, Cherky not far behind him, and then Echeverry and Bob as well, both putting up good numbers. Then when we look to possession regains and loose ball receptions, we've got Josko Vardiol 7.1, we've got Nathan Ake 6.7, Rodri 5.3. I think over the course of the tournament, and his numbers do kind of line up with this pair match when you're looking at the increase as he gets more minutes. I do think Rodri will get better and better at this. I believe when I was looking at his top speed as well, that was increasing over the game, so he really was easing himself back in and wasn't really pushing himself all too much in the earlier matches. And obviously with it being a small sample size, that will just limit the kind of metrics that we're looking at here. And then you've got Ruben Diaz as well, 5.2, but the kind of players you'd expect, your number 6, your central defenders, these are all players that are going to rank quite highly in all of these metrics. Ryan Aït-Nouri, good to see, 4.1. And then when you've got Matheus Nunes, that's probably the kind of like concerning thing with Matheus Nunes when you're looking at why City would want a right back. He is somebody that will directly apply pressure, but then how decisive is he at winning the aerial duels and winning the ground duels? Less so. So he ticks some boxes. He offers that threat going forward as an attacker, but then when you're looking on the defensive end, going back, there are holes to his game, not just the kind of individual mistakes he's made throughout last season. There are other things that consistently he's just not going to be able to do, and that's where City would look to make the improvement when it comes to a new right back. We then look at loose ball receptions. Rodri ranks the highest in this, 9.5. Vardiol 7.9, Ruben Diaz 7.2. Really good stuff to see. You've got Rico Lewis down there. He's got 7. Good numbers. When you're looking at Nico Gonzalez, as I mentioned with the movement to receive the ball, this is another area here where you go, okay, this is where you need to make more improvements. Remember, obviously, limited sample size, but when you're talking about recovering the ball, and you've got 1.4 possession regains per 90 compared to Rodri 5.3. You've got 2.9 loose ball receptions compared to Rodri 9.5. These are the areas you need to make that improvement on, being more available to receive the ball, and then when you are regaining possession as well, being more efficient in that. That's something he'll look to improve. But then when we go back to the start of the video with the line breaker passes, he's clearly well suited to the role and would do very well, because of the quality of the passing he can provide through the lines, over the top. So just all these kind of little details through metrics that just you're not going to see that regularly. And then if we move to this one with the physical data, as I mentioned with Bernardo Silva, there are reasons why he does appeal to Guardiola, does appeal to putting him in the midfield last season, because when you're looking at his the physical stuff that he's able to put up, ground he's able to cover, the number of runs, the distance, you compare that to some of the other midfielders, as we mentioned with the pressing, it's just not comparable. So that's why he had to be in that midfield. So yeah, no real surprise to see him total distance covered. Bernardo Silva is number 1. You've got Savinho, Aït-Nouri ranked very highly. If we move it over to the distance covered per 90, gives you a little bit more clue, because obviously the total distance is dictated by the players that play the most minutes. And Bernardo Silva still on the top 3 for distance per 90, as I mentioned, in comparison to other ones. So you've got Rodri 11.8, you've got Phil Foden 12.117. These guys all rank fairly highly in this one. Other players on 11, so you've got Reinders 11.13, you've got Ruben Diaz 11.36, you've got Gundogan 11.51, you've got Cherki 11.72, you've got Gonzalez 11.02, and then Echeverry 11.12. These are all the players that you want to see posting these kind of numbers, because a lot of these players are either going to play a lot of minutes from the start of next season, or they're going to be, by the end of it, playing a lot of minutes, I would expect. We then look at high speed runs. You've got Phil Foden, Cherki, Echeverry, all do very well in this metric. You've got Gundogan as well, surprisingly. Perhaps maybe not on the sprints, but when it comes to the number of runs, I think we've seen over the course of the last few months that his fitness levels has increased, despite the kind of links about him moving away. You've got Gonzalez, number of high speed runs down there. So these are zone free runs, these are to count as them. And then you've got Bernardo Silva, 138. So he's putting up a good amount of them. Then when we move to sprints, you've got Josko Vardiol, you've got Ryan Shirky, you've got Oscar Bob. And one thing that kind of stood out to me when I was looking at this going through is that when it comes to some of the central defenders, like Nathan Ake, for example, 35, you go with Kanji, 32 sprints, Diaz, 40. You can see the level is below, and they really just don't do that many sprints compared to some of the other players like Oscar Bob, like Phil Foden, like Ryan Shirky. And you can see where the sprints are necessary, and that ties back into the movement that we were talking about. The players that are getting up a lot of these sprints are the players that are always making themselves available to receive the ball. So it shouldn't be a surprise to see Shirky and Foden ranking highly, Oscar Bob putting up lots of sprints, because part of this will be their movement to be able to receive the ball in space. We'll be making these short bursts of acceleration. So yeah, that would be that one, and then that brings me to the end of the video. That is all of the tables that I've gone through. I've got a few more that I'm going to put together and post on the X account about crossing, and then there's another one on the passing aspect. 2 additional tables to go through. I'll look at them in a bit more detail and compare the players across the Club World Cup. But as I mentioned at the very start, this is very, very limited data, limited minutes, specific conditions that are not really going to be close to what we'd see in the peak of next season. But at the very least, there are encouraging signs on the players that do rank highly, particularly with the new players, the players that we expect to return to form and return from their injury, are going to make a big impact in a lot of ways, from their ability to break lines with the passing through to their pressing and their movement off the ball. Really encouraging stuff to see just in this tournament, and I'm sure the club would have been happy to see those improvements, while still seeing within the performances that there are areas to improve and still work to be done in the summer window before we get to next season. So if you enjoyed this video, let me know down below in the comments your thoughts. Is there anything that stood out? Is there something that I missed? Is there some stats you didn't understand, or you wanted me to explain to you a little bit more? Let me know in the comments. I'll jump in and try to help you out. Otherwise, make sure you like the video, make sure you subscribe, and we'll be back with more videos this week.